All right, everyone, welcome to another episode of the Big Questions with Big John. I'm your host, Big John, and today I've got a very interesting guest, like I always do. But this guy I've been following for a long time. He's actually been a guest on my other podcast, Free for All, and he's someone that I enjoy reading. I enjoy reading his blog posts, his books. Someone very interesting, but I'm going to give him the courtesy of reading his official bio. So I'm going to look straight ahead of my notes here so I get everything right. My guest for this episode is an American economist, author, and professor. He is known for his work in behavioral economics, public economics, and public choice theory, as well as his libertarian / ANCAP views. He is currently a professor of economics at George Mason University, where he has been teaching since 1997. He is also a research fellow at the Mercatus Center and an adjunct scholar at the Cato Institute. He has authored several influential books, including The Myth of the Rational Voter and Open Borders. His latest book, which he's here to discuss, yay us, is Build Baby Build, The Science and Ethics of Housing. Everyone, please welcome Professor Bryan Caplan to the show. Bryan, how are you? There you go. Hold it up. I'll make sure we get that also in the Chiron. Make sure, and we'll throw up your Amazon link as well for the book. Bryan, how you doing? We haven't seen each other in a little bit.
I'm doing really good, Big John. Let's do it.
Let's do it. All right. So the first thing I always love in these sort of episodes is since libertarianism, anarchy, anarcho-capitalism seems to be strange to most people, to the general public, even if they're well-intentioned. They don't understand it. They hear things that might not be true about it. So give me a little bit of your background. What got you interested in your past in academia, in your formation of your philosophies, your libertarian philosophies, your ANCAP philosophies? And I guess we should get back to the beginning. Am I even accurate in calling you a libertarian / ANCAP?
Sure. Well, let's see. Libertarian, definitely. For anarcho-capitalist, I always say yes, but not the crazy kind.
Okay. So what does that mean? Are you a free stater?
The same kind.
Are you a free stater, for example?
It's I don't live in New Hampshire. It seems like a fine attempt to make a better world.
Okay.
I've been there, talked to them, so they're trying to make things better. It's not easy. In terms of my own development, I guess I'll say that it started with Ayn Rand. So I read Atlas Shrugged starting in my first year, or my last year of high school at the very beginning. When I read that, I was curious, is any of the stuff she's talking about even possible? Because I had long been taught that laissez-faire capitalism was absolutely terrible and would be a complete disaster. I just started reading, especially Austrian economists, other economists. By the time that I got to Berkeley, then I started reading a lot more mainstream economics. I got my PhD in economics from Princeton. I'll say by that, but long past that point, I stopped calling myself an Austrian. I think there's a lot of problems with Austrian economics. There's some insight, but more problems. In any case, then I've been a professor at GMU since 1997, actually. Initially, I basically was just publishing my dissertation, which is okay, but nothing exciting. Once I had enough publications where I felt secure, that's when I branched out and started working on the projects that I think are really important. You mentioned behavioral economics. A very big part of what I do is trying to understand actual human psychology, to understand why people favor the policies that they do, why they think about economics the way that they do. My general view is that when we teach intro econ, usually we imagine that students arrive as damaged goods and we're trying to fix them. And that is, according to my work, the correct thing to do, because normal human beings are damaged goods. They aren't a blank slate where they just don't have an opinion if they haven't studied economics. Rather, they just start off with some of the worst views in the world, crazy stuff, things like international trade is bad. And then from there, and then a lot of what economists are supposed to do is just to fix that stuff. I've branched out from writing journal articles. Actually, now I don't think I've written a journal article for about 10 years. I find books to be a lot more rewarding in terms of being able to craft a cool product and get people to get actual attention, get some money for it. And then about 10 years ago, I had the idea maybe I should try to broaden things further by doing a nonfiction graphic novel That's where my book Open Borders, which is a New York Times bestseller, comes from. I don't actually draw, but I storyboard the books, and then I micromanage the artist to make it look exactly the way they want it to look. So I got one of those books, and my latest book on housing is called Build, Baby, Build, The Science and Ethics of Housing Regulation. Here again, basically what I'm doing is there's a whole pile of really important research that's super boring and hardly anyone on earth would ever read it, saying that if we would radically deregulate housing, we'd get enormous gains. And this is the book where I try to share this knowledge with readers, but also snap it all together so you just get a vision of a positive world. I think a lot of times libertarians just complain and say, oh, isn't it terrible? We have government lighthouses. What I like to do is say, imagine how awesome it would be if we had a free market. And here is what we could reasonably expect. Right. In this book, I say you could reasonably expect housing to cost about half of what it does on average in the U.S., with much larger falls in the most desirable areas. And then there's a whole bunch of other benefits that pile on.
Wow. That was a lot to unpack. So I've got like tons of questions for you, Brian.
Right,
so I'm going to round.
Tell us, Big John.
I'll ask them. I'll ask them there, Brian. So initially you said Ayn Rand was an inspiration for you. Now, Ayn Rand for me, I have to admit, Atlas Shrugged and The Fountainhead really didn't come to them till college era. Really didn't get to them in high school. I was too focused on that science stuff. But when I did get around to Ayn Rand, I actually, while her economic views and views on liberty, I instantly gravitated to, I really don't know that I was attracted to objectivism. Is that similar to your introduction to her, or were you attracted to both?
Yeah, I mean, honestly, I had never read anyone in the whole range of what we would call rationalists. So just one person saying, reason, we got to be really reasonable. I like that a lot. I mean, I think if so like in the fullness of time, with the benefit of all that I know, I can say, yeah, well, she wasn't all that reasonable actually, and had a lot of crazy views and had a lot of bad arguments. But still that ideal of I'm going to be a calm, rational thinker in this world of grotesque irrationality and free-flowing emotion, that had a lot of appeal to me.
Yeah.
And still does, actually. There's a lot of things like she, as far as I can tell, had zero understanding of probability or Bayes' theorem or probability biases, which are actually essential to being a reasonable person. And yet just waving that flag of A is A was a big influence on me.
Yeah. And excuse me. And sometimes, even though you get an inspiration from someone, even if you find out they're flawed, they're still very valuable in that they set you on a path that led to your own understanding, right? So that happens a lot, right?
I always try to avoid rewriting history. If there's someone who's a great friend and then we have a big breakup, I don't try to go and say, oh, actually, we were never really friends. No, we were totally friends. We're the best of friends. And then something went wrong. I don't know what happened. In the case of a thinker, often I feel like I do have a lot more insight. It's like, no, that argument on page 37 turned out to be incorrect. Here's why. That's the way that I think about it.
Yeah.
I did also meet a lot of her followers when I was 18, and they seemed generally quite crazy. But I don't go and dismiss a person just because their followers are crazy. Or a person could be crazy in a lot of ways and still have something useful to say.
Sure.
Does mean that a bit scary to hang around them, but.
And it's interesting. I think, I don't know, for people of a certain age, and I'm looking at myself actually here, perhaps their first exposure to Ayn Rand was on the Phil Donahue show back in the day, where she would come on a couple of times and people were kind of shocked, at her upfront atheism, especially for the time in the late 70s.
You're right. I mean, back in the 80s, to be an atheist was still quite shocking to people, and people, oh my God.
Yeah. And when
are you going to kill me?
Well, when you think of her appearances and say Milton Friedman's appearances and I'm thinking of Donahue, despite him
Friedman was on Donahue as well?
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
Okay,
if you don't, if you haven't seen it, catch his appearance on Donahue. It was right around the time of the Chrysler bailouts, and he went on to argue against them. He went on to not to debate in person, but to debate Ralph Nader's ideas. It was like, for a lot of libertarians, it's very interesting. I had this conversation with some other prominent libertarians, and right now, if you're a certain age, the libertarian god to you is Ron Paul. and Ron Paul introduced you to libertarianism and things of that nature. But Ron Paul didn't do that for me. It was Milton Friedman that got me interested in libertarianism, and it was following his appearance on that Phil Donahue show. You know, it was where he came on, and not that I was ever an economics major. I was a scientist. I was, you know, in college, my degrees are in biology and computer science. So economics was something like, ugh, that involves dirty money, and you know, it's that perception of economics when you're younger. But yeah, so it's very interesting that, you know, those two on ironically a far left liberals talk show would come on and have actual debates and conversations, and I think that did a lot more good.
I did actually watch a lot of Donahue when I was a kid. I wouldn't think of him so much as far left as establishment left or something like that.
Fair enough. Yeah,
But,
yeah.
And
I guess
I think in the far left of the 80s, which
yes,
though possibly even more socialist than the far left today, definitely was totally different on almost everything else. And most of the stuff that left-wing people get very upset about today would not have even been discussed at that time.
Oh yeah, it was considered crazy. You're right. Yeah, it's funny how that window keeps shifting, and your perceptions change. Right?
I mean, even to say it's a shift makes it sound like there's a pattern rather than it's just going off into nowhere. It's
variable
like,
directions, right?
What in the world is even happening?
Yeah, you're right. You're absolutely right. All right. So now the other thing I want to ask you is economics as science, pseudoscience, discipline. I don't know what word you would use. Tell me, why is it that well, aside from the fact that public education is useless for the most part, why don't we strive to teach children economics as a basic tenet of their education, whether it's homeschooled, public school, private schools? It seems that most kids don't get exposed to any economic ideas until it's kind of forced on them in college, if at all. Some go through in their college education or their formative years without ever having considered economics. So why do you think that is? And I'm assuming I know your answer. Like, how much are we missing out by not teaching young minds about economics?
Good question. I mean, the we is a little funny. I'm a homeschooler, and I'll say, like, I totally teach economics. I don't shut up about economics. I do it over and over and over and over and
What
over
a
and
surprise,
over.
right?
Now, as to why other people don't, it's like, yeah, well, they're not economists and they don't care about economics, so they don't. There's the puzzle about why even most economists don't teach economics to their own kids.
Right.
I was actually on an episode of Freakonomics, and I appeared to be the only it was about economists and their kids and economists and parenting, and I appeared to be the only economist who actually made a big deal about imparting this way of understanding to his kids, and the others like, yeah, I don't really care. And it's like, how can you not care? It's super important.
Why is that? Is that a case of like the cobbler's kids type of thing, or is it that they don't?
I think this is what's really going on. Most economists, being an economist is not the most important thing in their lives. They got something else that matters. Honestly, for most economists, it's more important to be a Democrat than it is to be an economist. And therefore, they are much more concerned about passing on the values of the Democratic Party than the values of the economics profession, or the worldview of the Democratic Party versus the worldview of the economics profession. That's, I think, a big part of it. So, like, even though, I could go and talk with a Democratic economist and we can have a lot in common, and yet the stuff that we talk about is not stuff that they are really eager to go and spread, whereas I would say this is exactly the stuff that we should be telling everybody. But again, the main explanation for why we don't teach much economics is most people aren't economists, don't care about it. I would disagree a little bit in saying that we don't talk about it at all. I think what really goes on is that we funnel a lot of crummy economics into history, social studies, without any argument, without any models. And we just go and say, yeah, of course, we really need the FDA. The more regulation, the better, pharmaceuticals, because that way we know they're safe. That kind of stuff was taught to me over and over in K-12, even though it wasn't until my senior year of high school that I actually had a class called economics. And that class, by the way, was terrible.
As it usually is, right?
Yes. Now, as to what's going on, probably another big part, obviously, is that overwhelming majority of teachers, whether public or private school, honestly, are left-wing. And so the kind of stuff that they might want to teach would come down to something more like, well, inequality caused the Great Depression, or greed made prices go up. And it's like, like how exactly, and what's the story? And
Well, that was going to be
so why wasn't there another Great Depression in the 80s then? If inequality causes
right,
depressions,
right. Well, let me ask you this: why? Like, it's always struck me that even when I started learning some formal level of economics, it always struck me as weird. Like, why is everybody a Keynesian? Why is every professor seemingly a Keynesian or a Marxist or something? Is it because they associate it with, say, secularism or with being a basic? Now, in their worldview, even if I give them the benefit of the doubt, that they say, well, communism, Keynesianism is looking out for the common man. We're trying to figure out how to get more wealth into the hands of the common man. So, top-down management, government at the top, everything comes from government. Government is good. They're the ones who are greasing the economic pipes. And, why is it so dominant? I mean, you bring up one of the things I used to do when I hired kids out of college for some statistics work, like, say, as an analyst, I'd say, like, did you ever take an economics course? Yeah. Oh, I took a couple. Yeah, I've got my minor in economics, blah, blah, blah. Oh, who's your favorite economist? Without fail, Keynes, Marx. You wouldn't hear about anybody else. You mention anybody else, Friedman, Hayek, Schumpeter, anybody, nothing. It's like you might as well be talking about somebody, Zeno of Athens or something. So why do you think that is? Is it just that people default, like in the teaching profession, I mean, that default to Keynesianism? Is it tied into what you said, their democratic, leftist, liberal worldview, however you want to call it? What is it?
Bunch of questions there. So just to back up, I mean, I think the reason why most economists are left-wing is that almost all young intellectuals are left-wing. That's a big part of the intellectual culture of the West. And then economics generally moderates them. It doesn't flip them, it moderates them. So, I mean, I've known a lot of economists, totally normal economists. Normally they start off as a typical far-left teenage intellectual. They learn some economics, and then they're like, oh, all right, rent control is not actually a good idea. Oh, we don't actually want to have 100% tax on inheritances. Oh, there'd be negative effects of these things. And then they moderate, but they retain left-wing values. So I think that's the right way of thinking about it. It's not so much why do they become left-wing as they started off that way, and economics did generally make them less so. I would say it is just not true that there are many Marxist economists. It's a really tiny...
Really?
It's a real tiny segment of PhD economists that would identify as Marxist, or I think would even be remotely Marxist. For Keynesians, I'm going to tell you, like, in an important sense, I'm a Keynesian.
How so?
Right? So intellectually, not in terms of policy, but intellectually, the heart of Keynesianism is just the idea that market prices and wages are sticky, so that if there's a large fall in demand, we don't just have an instant rapid deflation which restores full employment. Instead, normally there is a drawn out period of high unemployment and depression. Right now, most Keynesians, in fact, almost all Keynesians then use this as a big rationalization for left-wing policies they always liked. But that is, in fact, no way part of the textbook model. It's just a misinterpretation. Like, if you go and hear someone saying, well, Keynesians believe that whenever there's a recession, there should be more government spending, and whenever there is inflation, we should raise taxes. Say, okay, those are two things that are recommended by the model. Do you know what the model also says? It says that you should have tax cuts during recessions and cut government spending when there's inflation. And that's equally in the model. So the idea that Keynesian policy prescriptions have to be left-wing is, I say, totally an artifact of people misinterpreting the model and twisting it in the direction of whatever ideology they already had, which normally is left-wing. But on that basic point of if spending fell in half by this year, that there'd be a lot of unemployment and output would go down, that's true. And some of that's government regulation, but a lot of it is just psychology of people really resent having a cut in their nominal pay. So anyway, yeah. I'm happy to go on length with that. But anyway, Keynes himself was bad.
Well, right. Well, I was going to say
there's Keynesian economics, which is just literally the exact economic theory, which I would say is actually has very important and deep insights, which all people ignore at their peril.
Right. So let me ask you this. I don't know if it's an apocryphal story, but I've heard or I've seen videos of both Hayek and Friedman say that towards the end of his life, Keynes kind of started to regret how his acolytes were interpreting his work, and that he was on the lecture circuit, and in the margins of his notes, he wrote to himself, notes to not to disavow of how his theories were being used, but to actually reel them back in. That, hey, this happened. A lot of this was during world wars, and these are exceptions, and blah blah blah. And then he died on the lecture circuit before he could act. Is that true? Do I have that story?
It's
right,
true that he had some complaints about his followers. I don't think there was any major change of heart with Keynes. I'm not a Keynes expert, but just based upon everything I know about human and scholarly psychology, I would always say it's super unlikely that someone is about to recant and then dies. It is completely consistent with the Keynesian model to say, sure, we want to have government spending during recessions, but now we're not in a recession anymore, and so we should go and tone it back. And Keynes might get a bit annoyed at overly radical Keynesians that are pushing for government spending when the model doesn't call for it. But that's pretty different from there. I'm a little bit more sympathetic to the view that George Orwell was about to stop being a socialist before he died. Okay. Even there, though, I would say, no, he was an extremely perceptive guy and honest and with a lot of common decency. But there was just some very core economic illiteracy that would have required an enormous amount of one-on-one debate to have any hope of changing. And guy is that famous, he's not likely to go and give you that time.
Well, there is that practicality that if you've made your living espousing a certain viewpoint, to then turn on that becomes very difficult. And I mean, if we're looking at ourselves in the mirror, would any of us do that? Like, if So I'm sympathetic to that. But I thought it was always an interesting story because I heard Friedman and Hayek both say that in interviews.
There's a couple of famous quotations about it where Keynes is saying something like this: "It's gone sour and silly." Right, and that's I wouldn't put too much weight in it. Honestly, a lot of this is that people make a huge deal about minor deviations from their own views. Right. So people can go and flip out at someone for a very minor disagreement. The fact that two people are screaming at each other does not mean that they actually have a big disagreement. They could be really similar and they're just fighting a lot over some little details, and it could just mean that they're competing for the same audience. So they need to, as we say, artificially differentiate the product.
I was going to say they need a differentiating feature. Yeah. Okay. Let me ask you this, especially being a teacher, what do you think is the perception of economics as a field of study among your students? Do they view it as, do they closely associated with business? Like, do they make that mistake where it's like economics equals business? Not that it's an MBA, but or do they? You mentioned the psychology of economics that's intertwined with economics, or is it a statistical exercise? How do you find that your students interpret when they say, I'm an economics major, or they come in as freshmen and say, I want to be an economics major? What do you think they think that means?
So at a school like George Mason, I'll say the most common attitude is complete apathy.
Really?
Yeah, so that's the most common thing. That's true for almost all college students. Yeah. There's very few intellectually engaged college students, even at top schools. There's really more of, I just punch a clock and I get this union card at the end. Right. So there's that. But George Mason is special in another way. We do have a sizable minority of students who are here specifically because they like the George Mason brand of economics, or they've gotten excited by the George Mason brand. So then for a lot of these students, economics is almost synonymous with libertarianism, or it's the way of thinking about the world that rationalizes libertarian policy. So I think that's another common view here at George Mason and almost nowhere else. Okay. But the broader view of economics, and this is something you can get just from reading people that aren't economists, but also sometimes economists who are reaching out and saying and complaining about the field, is basically to say it's almost all a big rationalization for libertarianism, right? Even people who are lifelong Keynesians and like Larry Summers, if you go and read The Nation, according to them, he and Milton Friedman are pretty much the same guy. I mean, seriously.
Really?
And if you're wondering, what's going on there?
Yeah, what is going on?
Yeah. So here's basically the story, right? If you are a left-wing fanatic, then the difference between someone who says a lot of good things about markets and someone who says one good thing about markets is pretty much nothing. In both cases, you have crossed the sacred line of never say anything good about markets. So Larry Summers, once in a long while, he says something good about markets. That's the main thing he does, is complain about markets and criticize, but he'll say a few good things. And that is, for someone who is a true left-wing fanatic, is like, well, normally I'm against Satan, but 3 times a year I say Hail Satan and make a donation to the devil. So that's, I think, a lot of what's going on. There is this crazy perception of economics as being market fundamentalism or the intellectual rationale for that. If I were a mainstream economist, I'd just be pulling out my hair and saying, what a ridiculous thing to think. But stepping back, it's like, look, you're both wrong.
Right.
You're both wrong. Yes, they're wrong to go and think that Larry Summers is the same as Milton Friedman. But on the other hand, there is a reason why someone like Larry Summers is unpopular with the left. And a lot of it is just having some basic common sense, saying things like we can't spend an infinite amount of money. Seriously, like one of the last things that Larry Summers did to get in trouble with the nation was during COVID, he said, we're giving a lot of government money to people that have been put out of work, and that's wonderful, and we should, and we're giving a lot of money, and that's great, and we should give even more. But, and then Larry Summers says, but there's got to be a limit. We can't give an infinite amount of money to everybody.
Right.
All right, you might say, yeah, duh, why does that even need to be said? But to writers at a place like The Nation, it's the last thing where their eyes turn to flame and they're like, how dare you say we can't give unlimited money to everyone, you horrible Friedmanite monster.
And now he's an apostate.
Yeah, I mean, and again, it's the kind of thing where it's like, basically, you're talking as if libertarians are the only people in the world who know the sky is blue, and you're lashing out at us for that. And it's like, well, thank you for giving us so much credit that we totally don't deserve, because you don't need to be a libertarian to say the sky is blue or that you can't give people an infinite amount of money.
Yeah. Now, to your knowledge, Krugman hasn't crossed that line, has he?
There's definitely some leftists who don't like Krugman, but he has...
When is all this happening? I'm missing all this, Brian. What's been happening? I must have had my head in the sand.
So the Krugman of the 90s, he was someone where... Like, honestly, like, you know, so I'll just say on the record. First of all, Krugman is extremely smart, very high IQ, much higher than mine. I've no doubt of that. And also he has done some fantastic work. And when he wants to be, he can be a totally reasonable and excellent economist. However, he is just like the typical economist that I described. He started off as a left-wing teenager, almost certainly. And all that economics can do is dampen that a bit. But nevertheless, the values are still very left-wing. Right. That does mean, definitely in the 90s, I think that he was not well-liked by further left people. There was also, by the way, a time when far-left people were just sort of shutting up and still shell-shocked by the collapse of the Soviet Union. But by the late 90s, then Krugman has started to become very vocally left-wing. And then, so he's now had 25 years where he's said almost nothing that really upsets left-wing people. But on the other hand, you know, he does not have the love of someone like Joe Stiglitz, who pretty much just goes out of his way to avoid saying anything that would really upset the left. Although, like, with one big exception, his textbook actually still says some reasonable things. He normally tries to go and immediately claw it back. I've recently been reading a bunch of economics textbooks for the book that I'm writing. But still, when he has his public persona, that's where it's almost nothing except complaining about markets and praise of government, no matter what's going on.
And you know, to some extent, fine. You know, I get it. You know, but I don't know. Sometimes it's the indignation that goes along with it that I find off-putting. But you know, that could be my particular quirk. You know. Okay, great. I don't want to skip over. I want to talk about your book, Build Baby Build: The Science of Ethics and of Housing Regulation. Now, there you go. Thank you. You're a great marketer there, Brian.
High tech.
Now, let me ask you this. So when you talk, now I live in New York, New York City. So of course, since day one, I've been surrounded by, you know, liberals, Democrats, leftists, take your pick of the term in any given era that would apply to them. And this issue for them is a no-brainer. You know, rent control is awesome. Rent stabilization is awesome. Only the rich like if we didn't keep apartments in Greenwich Village at $80 a month in 2024, how would anybody be able to afford to live in Greenwich Village? We need housing regulation. We need to keep these horrible landlords in line, or else they leave their tenants out to freeze, blah, 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 blah. The second anyone talks about deregulation, especially in heavily, I'm sure San Francisco is the same way, Chicago's the same way. Any urban area, housing deregulation is an anathema. They just don't even want to hear about it. Just like, say, abolishing the minimum wage. It's like this whole, you hate the poor. You hate the middle class if you even broach this subject. And I'm starting to also hear this now out in the suburbs. Man, if we have housing deregulation, builders go wild. This house that I bought for $1 million is going to be worth 200 grand. I can't have any of that. What happens to me? I spent all this money to buy in. So Brian, you put this book together. It's in a graphic novel, which I love because I'm a comics guy.
Great. I never would have guessed.
If I take away this background, you would see nothing but like Punishers and and the Watchmen and whatnot behind me. But having said all that, I love the fact that you can teach people visually as well as through the word. So now let's start from the beginning. Why is housing deregulation a benefit to society? How can we make people understand? A, explain the benefit. B, how can we make them understand?
Of course, there's an enormous amount of housing regulation with so many different kinds. We could go on all day.
Yeah.
The main stuff I'm talking about is the prevention of construction, regulations that make it hard to build stuff. What's going on there? It's one of the easiest applications of economics. It just says that when you make it hard to build stuff, supply is lower and then prices are higher.
Right.
All right, pretty obvious. What motivated me to do the book is just reading a lot of research saying, look, this effect is enormous. It's not just that regulation is raising prices by 2 or 3%. Right. In the U.S. on average, it's probably more like 100%. And in a place like New York City, you may be right. Maybe it is like the regulations raising prices by 400%. Therefore, if you want to make housing affordable, all you really need to do is start tearing down the regulations, take a flamethrower to these rules so that people can build stuff. Notice that's totally different from rent control, which is all a separate issue. Because like with rent control, they're basically saying we need government to go and keep the prices low. On the other hand, with the prevention of construction, those people you're talking about are saying we need to keep prices high. It's like, well, government's got to do something. I don't know. Keep the prices low, keep the prices high. Anyway, my book is fully on the side of prices should be low, but not by saying you can't charge a high price, because that doesn't actually create houses. In fact, it reduces the number of houses that are available because people don't want to build when they can't get a good price. They don't want to rent when they can't get a price. But in any case, the heart of the book is going over all the regulations that are strangling housing supply so that we can produce a lot more and prices can be cheap. Out of those two groups, I'll say the rent control people, they are just in deep denial, or just not having any understanding of basic econ and how rent control, what does it do? It increases the amount people want to buy while reducing the amount people want to sell, leading to shortages. It is not a solution to lack of housing. It allows a few people to get lucky and to get in a below market place, but at the expense of discouraging construction and just creating a ton of waste. Now, there's other people who think that if we deregulate, the prices will go down. They are correct. That's the whole point. I would add, though, that part of what I do in the book is look at public opinion and housing regulation. It is not true that homeowners are the main people that are supporting regulation. They're supporting it especially. Rather, it's just humans, owners, tenants, almost everyone supports housing regulation. And it's not because they actually like the idea of keeping prices high. Rather, it is because, first of all, they're just so economically illiterate, they deny there's any connection between supply and price. Right. It's like, I don't see why letting homeowners build more would reduce prices. Why would they be nice? Like, that's the point. They're not being nice. It is what you need to do to fill your units if you build a lot more is cut price. Right. So there's that. And then you're just having paranoid stories about all the horrible things that will happen if you don't have the regulation. Normally they're correct. There's going to be a bunch of problems. Yeah, it's true. If you let people build more skyscrapers, then some people lose their views and there'll be more shadows cast. What I say in the book is once we really step back, these complaints are quite petty and we should just ignore them. not deny them, ignore them and say, yes, yes, you're totally right. And we're not going to lift a finger about this, nor should we, because it's much more important to go and let people build a lot more housing and get prices down. And these complaints are really just a distraction from the big issue. Furthermore, since you are in the New York area, you'll appreciate this. An argument that I rely upon heavily in this book, honestly, it's one that I rely upon heavily in life in general. It's this. All right, you go to New York and people complain, right? I assume you've heard complaining New Yorkers.
Hey, listen, there's a point of pride to be a complainer.
Yes, and they complain about their own city where they've chosen to live.
Right.
Right? And there's traffic, there's parking, there's noise, there's this, there's that. And yet they stay there paying much higher prices than they would pay if they were to go someplace else.
Correct.
Actions speak louder than words. They say there's one clear implication of all this, which is there must be some unspoken positives that are so awesome that they more than outweigh those negatives so much that you want to pay piles of money to stay where you are.
Right.
That's what housing regulation misses, is all of the good things that you have from having other people around you. The effect on number of restaurants you've got, cultural opportunities, social opportunities, job opportunities, all of this stuff exists because of the population.
Right.
Have you ever heard a New Yorker say the city be perfect or not for all the people? Ever heard that one?
I've heard that. I've heard a lot too. I've said a lot worse too.
Yes. All right. So,
yeah.
New York City be perfect, not for all the people. Wrong. New York City without the people would not be New York anymore. There'd be the restaurants would all close. There'd be the museums would close. There'd just be nothing to do. The reason why it is the way that you like is because it has all those people who then cause a bunch of problems too. But the very fact you're there paying this high rent shows that it is a net positive for you. And we should stop trying to, in particular, government should stop trying to stop this net positive thing from happening.
Right. And what it doesn't doesn't the regulation also prevent the market from defining these types of neighborhoods, the states that, like, for example, like it's that old joke. If you want to get like 5 acres in a ranch home, for $50,000, you go to Montana or wherever, you go to Idaho.
Sure.
You want to be alone, right? If you want to be amongst the skyscrapers and media centers and things like that, it'll cost you $1 million for a lot less property in New York or Chicago or LA, right? Or whatever, right? So to me, that's a market dynamic that the regulation completely crushes. And that, correct me if I'm wrong, would further lead to this societal discord that you see, right? Like where people are like, I can't afford to live. I'm a middle class person on a salary of $80,000 a year. I can't afford to live in New York City. I can't afford to live in New York City if I have 5 roommates. Yeah.
Completely crushes is, of course, exaggerated. It does mean that you've got to make hard trade-offs. So, the main thing the government does is it crushes some of the options. The option to just live by yourself in the middle of nowhere, that one is quite well protected. The market's doing fine there. On the other hand, the option to have a cheap, spacious place in a desirable location,
right,
that trifecta is something that government basically has prevented from existing. I mean, to varying degrees. In Texas, it's a lot easier to get something like that, for example. But still, nothing near what we're capable of doing. And again, as to why government is crushing this, it's based upon the self-righteous sense that we're doing good. And I say, they're just mistaken. Now, there's also this idea of, it's just the natural scarcity. You can't have too many more people living in New York City. It's like, let's take a look at Central Park. Is every building next to Central Park a skyscraper? No. Then we can have a lot more people, obviously.
Right.
And we know for a fact that as soon as you get permission to build a skyscraper across the street from Central Park, it gets built. The demand is totally there. The technology is there. You, as a New Yorker, you probably know that the Empire State Building was built in about a year.
Oh yeah, it's one of those marvels.
Right. But again, it's not really a marvel. It's just that the 100 years ago, we had the technology to do it. We still have the technology. We don't have is all the pieces of paper that are required to break ground.
Well, that's what I meant by marvel, and not just to break ground, but also when you see those old footage and old pictures of like guys walking on beams 80 stories up in the air without any safety lines, or or eating their lunch with their feet dangling over Manhattan. First of all, I'm acrophobic. Just watching that stuff makes me jittery, right? But to be able to say, hey, I'm casually going to have my pastrami sandwich and a beer while sitting on this, 4-inch wide steel beam, 80 stories above the streets of Manhattan. Yeah, that's not happening today. Even if people were willing to do it, it's like no insurer would let you do it. So that's what I meant by marvel, not the actual building, but to say that it got done. What was it, in 8 months? I think they built, or even the World Trade Center, which came after the Empire State Building.
So early 70s, mid 70s.
Yeah, like what, a year and a half for the
I didn't
towers?
know. So I didn't know the World Trade Center was that fast. I thought that
I think it was. Yeah. And they had the innovation of express elevators. I think that was the first building that had that innovation, where you had local and express elevators based on the New York City subway system. So because they figured you can't have local elevators that go from 1 to 100 and then back down again, obviously, right? That would take forever. So anyway, interesting stuff. Not to get too into it, but yeah, you're right. Now, so you seem to be willing to say, like, yeah, listen, if we deregulated the housing market completely or largely, you do acknowledge that there will be some pain along the way, right? That the future benefits might be there, but the short-term pain, people are that's almost like ripping the Band-Aid off. You're going to have some short-term pain, right?
Right. I mean, this is a basic fact about markets that I think a lot of libertarians deny. There's all of this talk of everyone gains. No, there is nothing that ever happens where everyone gains. Instead, what markets do is they create net benefits, always with some losers. Internet was not good for people who own travel agencies, right? Obviously not. If you go and say, oh, it didn't benefit someone. So that's something we always need to keep in mind. I will say that people are too quick to assume that all homeowners would lose. In particular, there's at least 3 kinds of homeowners that would have a lot to gain from deregulation. So one is anyone that wants to sell it to a developer, right? So if right now you own a townhome in San Francisco, developer wants to build a skyscraper there, you can't sell it to them. They can't build it, and therefore they're not going to go and pay you the $10 million that your house would be worth if they could. So there's that one. Another big one is any homeowner who wishes to upgrade. If you're a homeowner and you want to get a better place, you do not want to have sky high housing prices, because you will sell sky high, but you'll also have to buy sky high. In fact, if you plan on getting a better house, you would rather have rock bottom prices so that you can then get your better house at a cheaper price. And then last, homeowners who have adult children who would like their kids to be able to afford to live within 50 or 100 miles of them, so they gain too. Obviously, basically all tenants gain. Anyone who doesn't currently own a home gains. But anyway, the lesson is that while there's some losers, it is not simply everyone who owns a home loses, everyone who rents gains. There's a lot more categories of gainers. But yeah, it would be very foolish to deny that it would be better for everyone. I will say that there's a lot of people who complain where they still benefited. By the same logic of all the New Yorkers who say how terrible New York is, but they stay, there's also going to be some people who say, oh, like everything was so much better when there was regulation. And it's like, look, you made $5 million. It's like, yeah, but then I had to move to Florida. You didn't have to move to Florida. You could have stayed where you were, but you didn't. Right. So obviously you preferred that package. Actions speak louder than words. So yeah, a lot of what I say about this book, but really almost everything, is that if I were completely right, a lot of observers and critics would say, after we followed my advice, that I had been proven wrong. Like, no. I was honest the first time. I told you there'd be a lot of bad things. I told you that the complainers would be totally dissatisfied. I even predicted what's happening right now, which is that you would come and say, I told you so. But that's because you are not a good listener. You're not good listeners. I could go and say 20 times, there will be some losers. And then if we listen to me, then someone will go and say, see, there's a loser. You're wrong. Like, I told you there would be losers. I said we should do it anyway. I didn't give you some ridiculous sugar-coated
But I didn't believe you the first
advice.
time you told me. I didn't believe you the first time you told me, Brian.
Yeah. So for example, I say that a lot of marginal historic homes are just going to be torn down if people listen to me. And I say that's a good thing. I do not claim that there's going to be some incredible philanthropy which will save every townhome in San Francisco. In fact, I'm strongly hoping that is not true. Say, look, historic homes, look, if people love the home so much that they are willing to pay a large upcharge, or that you can make money charging admission to tourists, or if philanthropists will donate money, then great, let's save it. Otherwise, let the free market decide. That is, and if free market says demolish, then let's demolish. And with the hope, the reasonable hope, that what is built in place will be better than the last thing, which is what normally happens.
And if
The
it's
Empire
not,
State Building was built on the ruins of the old and beautiful Waldorf Astoria Hotel.
right. And look, if there is a mistake made in building, the market will correct it, right? The builder will bear the brunt of that, and the market corrects itself.
Yes. I mean, of course, to most people, the mistake is even looking at numbers. The first mistake you made was seeing whether people actually wanted to pay to preserve this thing. That's not the question. What is the question? That 3 architectural historians should not be upset. That's how our whole society should be arranged.
Yeah, it was funny. I was listening to an episode of Larry Sharp's show the other day, and his topic was the commercial real estate in New York City and how it's tanking, and the local politicians in New York City are like, how do we drive up the occupancy rates and this and that? I was talking to Larry about it, and I said, look, I think we all agree, but I mean, for people listening in, it was like, those buildings, leave them be. If they're empty, they're empty. They'll either get sold at what should be a market rate, or there's going to be businesses that we haven't even thought of yet. They're going to make use of those buildings. They won't go to waste,
Or better yet, rezone it for residential, which there's still enormous demand for.
Well, that would be the other thing, right? Is like, just get the government out of the way. Don't have government try to figure out what to do with these buildings.
Yes.
Let the owners figure out what to do with them. Hey, I'm going to turn it into like the world's first 80-story food mall. I don't know, whatever.
Yep.
Let the markets figure it out.
I mean, honestly, for places like New York, I would say that turning it into apartments or hotel rooms is the obvious thing. That is your long run growth sector. Do that.
Yeah, absolutely.
You basically need to be, we're not going to be in a world where everyone teleworks, but at least starting with, what would we do with this place in a world where everyone teleworked? And I think a lot of it is, we're going to make really big apartments, and they're going to be a lot cheaper than they used to be because we have all the space that we don't need for offices anymore.
Yeah. Well, look, to be honest with you, pre-pandemic, one of the ways I ran this type of media operation was I would look for office buildings because they're well wired. They have the fast internet already built in because it was built for business. And then you find like a suite that nobody wants in the corner somewhere in the outer reaches of Manhattan. And you could rent that place at a lot more affordable rates because nobody was interested in it. A business couldn't get away with a suite, but a small studio could survive. So I was using it as a studio, basically. Nobody else was. So, that's what I meant by businesses we haven't conceived of yet. If you just get out of the way, let people figure out what to do with a big building, what they can do with 4 walls. You know what I mean? Now, when you say deregulation, you've been focusing on where to build and the ability to build. Now, does that also include, because I could almost hear people asking this question, would you get rid of safety regulations? Would you get rid of building codes? Would you get rid of inspections, things of that nature?
In my book, I barely talk about that because most of the research is on just how denying business the right to build stuff is the big factor. But yeah, like if you go and put me on the spot, then you're like, absolutely, of course, take a flamethrower to all safety codes, everything else, because the free market will take care of it. People do not want to live in a building where they're going to be burned alive. They don't want to be in a building where that will fall over. It's totally standard, of course, before someone moves into a place to get it inspected by an independent person to find out what it's like.
Right.
The main thing that regulation does is push people to do things that are safer than the market actually wants. Right? It's like, what do you mean safer than the market wants? Because it costs money.
Yes.
Yes. If you just want to be perfectly safe, just stay in a bank vault behind wearing a bulletproof vest and don't go anywhere. Or as the saying goes, yes, a ship is safest at harbor, but that's not what they're built for.
Right.
So what markets do is they make the ugly trade-offs between safety and cost, which is great because those trade-offs need to be made. I don't think that this is a really big factor compared to things like you just can't build a skyscraper in terms of cost. But yeah, obviously it's adding a bit more to cost. There's standard market mechanisms for assuring product quality. Do they work perfectly? No. Guess what else doesn't work perfectly? Government regulation doesn't work perfectly. Right.
Yeah.
Even if you pass a regulation saying everything must work perfectly, does not mean that everything works perfectly. So I say that like this pseudo certainty that we get from government is just a waste of time, and instead the free market takes care of us.
Yeah.
I mean, when you go and buy a product, like if you're dissatisfied with a product, what do you do in the real world? Do you go and call up the regulator? No. Do you sue them? No. What do? You talk to the business and you say, hey, I'm not happy. Normally what they do is say, oh, I'm terribly sorry. What can we do to make this right? And then they do it.
Right.
That's actual business.
Right.
Normally going way beyond anything required by regulation. And it's why does Costco let people return almost anything, even if it's totally unsaleable? It's like Costco figured out that they made more money if people felt totally safe to buy whatever. And it works. And it's not government. It is competition that gives consumers these great deals, of course.
Yeah.
And it's like, but if you say that, then does that mean we shouldn't have government? Yeah, exactly. Exactly. Yes. Costco shows, Costco, therefore anarchy. Is,
That's a T-shirt, Brian, if I've ever heard one. If Costco, then anarchy. Absolutely. All right. So, my personal anecdote on that was when I bought my house in New York City, because it's a cottage industry in New York City to pay someone to rat you out to the building inspectors. That seems to be like, if one of your neighbors has any sort of beef with you, because they have an anonymous tip line, right? So
a snitching line.
A snitching line. It goes back years, right? So someone had a beef with a different family member with the same surname who was an architect and a builder. So they just decided to make anonymous complaints against anybody who owned property in New York City with the same surname. So they eventually came to inspect my house, right? And I was cited for not having in a private residence handicap accessible rails and ramps to my own home. Yeah. So I went to court, and the funny thing is the administrative judge said, you're guilty of this because I see the pictures. There's no rails and no ramps. And I said, yeah, but it's my home. It's not a business, and there's nobody here who needs that stuff. And he goes, well, I'm sure there's a law you're violating. And I said, well, I don't think there is. He made me stay all day, got the building inspectors to find a law I was violating. And this is the God's honest truth. After several hours of this, he said, listen, if you don't accept this, I'll just find something else that'll fine you 3 times as much.
Unusually honest.
Yeah, unusually honest is right. Anyway, long story short, I had to put in the rail because it was cheaper than the fine, and they just beat me down because otherwise I couldn't sell that property until that lien got cleared, which is like, when you talk about regulations, you see how it goes. So if you don't put in like a $600 handrail, you can't sell your $1 million home. That's the way it works, and that's sort of like the racket.
Yeah, and here's a story far more egregious. I was talking when I was just speaking in Colorado. I was talking to someone from Boulder who said there was a major fire. I think it destroyed over 1,000 homes a couple of years ago, and none of them have gotten their rebuilding permits yet because there's a big fight about how they have to go and and when they build the new homes, they have to put them in with all of the new, they have to satisfy all the new regulations, which are adding the person told me adding over $100,000 to the cost. So like every home has to have a electric car charging port and down the line. So, and this is one where even I would say, I think that in a democracy, there'd be enough sympathy for people's homes burned down that they would just go and make an exception for them. But apparently in Boulder, no exceptions. Too bad. We're so sorry that your home burned down. If you want to rebuild it, you're going to have to go and come up with another $100,000.
Insane. Insanity. That's the only way to describe it, is insanity. All right, Brian. So that covers the book. And like I said, it's a graphic novel, which makes it much more accessible to someone who doesn't read as much anymore as I do. I can't.
Yep, and even kids can read it. So, I mean, I tried to design this for everyone from 105-year-old PhDs all the way down to 5-year-old kindergartners. And I think that everyone in that whole range will get something out of the book.
Or 60-year-old overweight guys like me. It could be written for me. And, that's a great point, because I think that's the type of thing that does help economic literacy in this country, is making it accessible to younger kids and putting it in terms and examples that they understand. Like my niece, when she was, she's graduated now, but when she was younger, I would try to explain the concept of taxation to her. And it was funny that in one lesson she got it, wait, I work for the money? Yeah. And I said, now you get to give me half. Yep. Why? What did you do for me? Nothing. I'm just bigger than you, so I could take it from you, Well, that's not fair. Yeah, I know it isn't, but because I said, let me get half your lemonade stand money or whatever. Why, you weren't here, Uncle John?
All my Sandra Spooner.
Yeah, right. And all of a sudden, like you could see, started working. Then when she went to college, she started the Libertarian Club in her
All right.
college.
Nice.
So but my point is, like, we should strive to do that. Like, even just like not a formal education, even, I'm sure that's wonderful too, or even homeschooling education necessarily, but just making people aware of, why is the minimum wage bad? Why is housing regulation bad? Give me concrete examples of why that works. And to your
Right.
point,
And the way what I'm trying to do is not just concrete examples, but gargantuan examples.
even better.
So the minimum wage, for example, like minimum wage is terrible, but guess what? The U.S. federal minimum wage now is so low, I think less than 1% of all workers get the federal minimum wage.
You mean, what's that, 750 or the 50?
Yeah, 720, the 725, not your New York State minimum wage, which is a lot higher.
Right.
So at this point, I would say, all right, we have this federal minimum wage, but until they raise it, it's actually doing almost no harm. On the other hand, housing regulation is doing trillions of dollars of harm every year. Often I think libertarians are like other people, where we pick the issues that we want to talk about based upon the symbolism. And I really want to get people focusing on the substance and say, let's talk about the issues that actually are of the greatest magnitude.
Yeah, that seems to make sense. Like, I think a lot
Totally
of times
makes sense.
Well, you know what it is? And a lot of times libertarians, and listen, nobody is more shoot yourself in the foot than the libertarian, especially politically. And the fact that we try to take everything on all at once, like we have these purity tests, like, hey, Brian, there's one libertarian on this interview show, and I know I'm a libertarian, so what does that logically mean, right? Like, that's libertarians, right? There's always somebody who's not a libertarian in a room full of libertarians, right? Because we may disagree on one thing. So yeah, that is, I think, it's self-inflicted wounds, man. So you're right. Pick the biggest ones, the biggest symbolic victories, and let's move on from there. All right, Bryan Caplan, thank you so much. I want to end this, though, on a segment I call Silly Questions. Now, there's no right or wrong answers here. This is just to let the folks know a little bit more about you. Tell me the first thing that comes to mind, and bear in mind, these are silly questions. Okay. What's the most irrational thing you do daily despite being an expert in rational behavior?
I guess be upset about things that I can't do anything about.
You still find yourself getting mad just to...
Not often, but more than zero.
Fair enough. If it's more than zero, cool. Now, I think I found out that you're into role-playing games. What's your favorite role-playing game?
Mutants and Masterminds. First edition, of course. Mutants and Masterminds, first edition. Yeah, so actually, that's a game where I have heavily modified it for home play, but that is the game that I liked enough to put a lot of time into improving. Not a fan of their later editions, but yeah. So Mutants and Masterminds.
There you go, Mutants and Masterminds. To be honest with you, one of my first business venture out of college was a pro wrestling role playing game. That ended up actually getting productionalized and made.
Was that the Luchador game or a different one?
It was called Mat Wars, and
Mat
it actually
Wars, okay.
we ended up licensing it to Sergeant Slaughter, so we kind of hit the jackpot in the later.
All right,
days,
good for you.
That was pretty cool. But yeah, that role playing game. Outside of your own work, what's the greatest graphic novel of all time?
Outside of my own work, what is the greatest graphic novel of all time? I think I'm going to go with Sin City. Sin City, Frank Miller's Sin City, particularly volumes 1 through 4. 5 through 7 are much lower quality and uneven, but the original 4 volumes, just in terms of world creation and the power of the art and just the writing is so affecting. Right. It really just, it's almost Shakespearean. It's so good. Bad cough, blood in it, doesn't matter. I don't have to stay alive that much longer anyway. It's just like, oh man, a tear rolls down my cheek practically when I hear
Frank
that. Frank
Miller's awesome, and people.
Yes, and and the Sin City 1 and Sin City 2 movies also a huge fan,
sure.
like fantastic adaptation.
Yeah, no, they were great. That whole black and white film noir, I think it captured it great. And people forget Frank Miller was also great with The Punisher and with Batman and Daredevil, like.
Well, I don't think they forget his Batman because The Dark Knight. That's maybe his most famous thing, more famous than Sin City, probably.
True. Yeah, no, that's a great answer, Frank Miller. Okay. Now, you're clicking channels on TV or going back and forth on your streaming provider. What's the one TV show or movie that if you come across, you got to watch to the end, no matter where it is in the actual timeline of the show?
Probably Dexter. Dexter is definitely my favorite show of all time. Really, episodes 1 through 95. 96, which was the original series finale, wasn't good. And then there was a new season, which I did watch, but it was a shadow of the original. But Dexter, it's this Dostoevskian retelling of Crime and Punishment with so much depth, but also just humor. And it's just a complete joy to watch. So much craft. You could really tell people cared about every line of dialogue to make the writing fantastic. So Dexter.
Dexter it is. That's a good one. What is on your bucket list that might surprise people?
On my bucket list that might surprise people. That one is hard. Let's see. All right. So to have at least 16 grandchildren.
Okay, fair enough.
I got 4 kids, and I feel entitled that each of them should give me at least 4 grandkids. So, that's what I'm looking for.
Fair enough.
16 minimum. More the merrier.
Now, one of your books was
Selfish Reasons to Have More Kids.
Yes. Now, would people be surprised at the number of grandkids you want, or the fact they have trouble envisioning you as a doting grandpa?
I think just the number.
The number.
Like the sheer greed, the sheer genetic greed that I feel.
Well, that is very Mormon-like of you, I must say. To want to have
so I'm not Mormon. I've been very close friends with a lot of Mormons. I was in a Mormon Cub Scout troop when I was a kid, so I've known Mormons my whole life. They're just about the nicest people in the world.
Of course, yeah.
And actually, in public opinion, they remain quite unpopular. I looked at this like, do they know any Mormons? Like, how can you dislike Mormons?
I think it's that they feel that. I think if people have negative opinions of Mormons, it's because they feel they could not adhere to their tenets. I think that might be it.
But the Mormons would be the first people to forgive you for that, without you having to ask.
Now, this is a case of your rational, irrational thing, right? It's like,
Yep.
You're right. Why would anyone hate Mormons? They kill themselves, and fair enough. But there you go.
So I think they're actually below Muslims in Americans' favorability ratings.
Is it that bad?
Yeah, I think they are.
Wow.
Actually.
Not that there's anything wrong
we
with
don't have
Muslims.
Satanists on the list. We don't have any really despised group, but still, it's just like, oh my God, Mormons are losing.
All right. Bryan Caplan, Professor Bryan Caplan, thank you so much for joining us here on The Big Question. Please hold up your book again and let us know where people can buy it and what your website or socials are, whatever you want to share.
All right, yes. So you can buy it most easily from Amazon. That's where I would get it. If you go to it's published by the Cato Institute, so they got a bunch of other vendors for that. I have a Substack, which is just called betonit.ai.
Gotcha.
So one word, no dashes, just betonit.ai. And then my own website is bkaplan.com.
There you go. Professor Caplan, Bryan Caplan, thank you so much for joining us. Everyone, go out buy his book, Build Baby Build.
Buy it for all the kids, too. Think of the children.
Buy it for the kids. You'll be doing that's the best Christmas present you could get them.
If you've got 16 grandkids, they each need a copy.
All right. This has been Big John on The Big Questions with Big John.